So Tony is out. He decided to go to Egypt. He's in Egypt. And he wrote me Sunday night. So the Wi-Fi is terrible. I can't even watch Netflix. I was like, that sounds like a great holiday. You were planning to watch Netflix?
He's sitting on the beach. He just didn't want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wi-Fi problems.
But today, I have Olaf with me, co-founder, Growblocks, and I think the RevOps nerd as well. It's funny, we haven't used you that much in our content, but we're going to change that. This is the start.
Let's see how it goes.
You're going to get more airtime. And we're going to talk a bit about a super interesting conversation actually you and I had around how some companies, they're hacking their NRR to achieve obscene growth. Let's call it what it is, obscene growth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about it.
So the NRR hacking is really a term that we kind of came up with just in talking. I don't think it's an established thing. At least I Googled it. I couldn't find a single article about it.
No.
Out there.
I don't think it's a industry term by no means, but it's something that I've noticed a new way of upselling that has led to some incredible NRR numbers that historically SaaS have not seen. And yeah, thinking about kind of why is that favorable? Is it truly hacking? Is it actually creating additional revenue, or is it just taking a metric and then optimizing the whole company around it? I think it's just interesting to explore.
So it's not financial engineering we're going to get into.
No.
There is a legitimate model about it, behind it. So think about companies like Snowflake, Datadog, Monday.com. A lot of these companies, they have an excess of 100% NRR, and that is just crazy.
150, you mean?
Yeah, but it's absolutely intense. And you look at a SaaS business where you have subscriptions, and then that retention rate, it just compounds like crazy, and everyone wants it. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who's gonna go, no, I don't want to have that retention rate. That'd be silly. So we're gonna talk about how to actually achieve that today, and I think you should kind of kick us off a bit with a problem that a lot of companies face when they have this conversation around what should our retention rate be and how do we go about it.
Yeah, I think so. We obviously work with a lot of different SaaS companies who want to optimize every single metric in their business, and the one number that everyone is talking about these days is NRR. It's become the new number besides growth and CAC and the regular terms. NRR is now becoming one of the primary drivers of what companies are trying to optimize. And the fact is that NRR today, I think across all SaaS businesses, roughly comes to 105% on average. So that's that's where you're in the normal range. And in the last few years, a lot of companies have achieved NRR rates that I have never seen in my SaaS career, which is going to 150, 160, 170. And you have to question kind of why is that all of a sudden achievable where it was not achievable 5 to 10 years ago? And ultimately, is it something that has been engineered and it's just looking at the numbers through a different lens, or are they actually achieving a different business model where they are able to organically grow their NRR through different means that are actually creating immense value for that business? Because at the end of the day, NRR is so favorable to companies because the cost of $1 of new business is extremely expensive. We're looking at 16 to 18 CAC payback typically for a normal SaaS company. And when you're then looking at the upsell dollar, it's typically coming in at a third or a fourth of that cost. So if you can achieve an immense NRR, it basically means that as soon as you sign a customer, you have a very cheap way to grow your company into something amazing through kind of a very cheap way, if you will. And I've been in different businesses that have obviously all been looking at this number and how do we optimize churn?
We want that.
Yeah, and how do we optimize upsell? And what I've learned throughout the years is that some of these things are kind of fixed. One of the first companies that I worked in was called Falcon. Was incredibly efficient at getting new dollars in the door.
Yeah.
But it had a very limited NRR because the upsell simply just wasn't as high as it could be, and the churn was, a little bit on the high end as well, because there's always this sort of idea of easy in, easy out.
Yeah.
If you're able to steal customers from other easily, they're also able to be stolen from you easily. So there's a natural correlation between those two things. But I think kind of when we were thinking about how to, upsell that product better, we were dealing with a traditional SaaS model, which is where 105 NRR is completely acceptable and it's actually good in that sense. But the problem is that we found that we simply couldn't find a way to increase the upsell.
Yeah.
We could potentially, facilitate something on the churn, but the way that product was being sold was that, it was a full upfront sale. So basically meaning that we were selling to the organization, we were selling for the full need of what the platform could deliver on. And we were selling, full upfront contracts, upfront payments, very traditional. But we also sold the whole platform or the whole suite with that.
Yeah.
So what you're then left with is that the only thing you can upsell on is basically, well, are there more users who could use this tool? Are there more people you're going to be hiring for social media management?
Yeah.
And that in itself is, good, but it also means that you have to go in and you have to identify a new use case, and you have to find other users who might have utility in it, and then sell that again. So there's another sales process involved. And sales processes take time, and and if you've already sold them the full solution, they probably know who will need it and what they could use it for. So in that case, we simply just found that we could work our ass off to try to optimize it, but it simply just was a result of the go-to-market strategy and the pricing strategy and the way that the product was being built.
Yeah.
That was a function of what the NRR and the upsell was. It wasn't that we hadn't figured out the snowflake model.
Yeah.
Now we could do 180%. Just isn't that simple. It's actually something that you need to look at end to end, and then figure out how are you going to change your go-to-market and your pricing and packaging and your product so that you actually can have those kind of NR numbers.
No, I think the most tangible way. So we worked there together. It's another Falconeer, we used to call it. The best way we influenced NR was, let's raise the price again.
Yeah.
That was and I mean that's totally fair. And I think, by the way, you can run a totally well-run business, and having 105% NR, that's still good. I mean, that's still great.
Yeah.
So it's not that that's necessarily bad.
Yeah. No, but it is also the ones that that do have those incredible NRs. Sometimes what is behind that is a price increase.
Yeah.
And the problem with that in the long term is that you are raising a price on a value that the customer has, which inherently means that you've undersold the product to begin with. You basically didn't sell the full value of the product. So now you're able to do a price increase, and that inherently will be counted as an upsell or an expansion. So you're now getting a better NRR. You could argue that those dollars were actually left on the table in the sales process. But also the problem with doing that is that you can only do it until you reach the value of the product, and then the next price increase after that is going to lead to higher churn.
Yeah.
So those are not sustainable ways to grow or have a healthy NRR. Price increases are, a gap in your value being delivered and the value that was being bought, and then you're catching up to that value, right?
Yeah. So I think we should hop into some of the cases, because you said, hey, churn is kind of fixed based on the model, and what some of these companies you and I talked about are really great at is not necessarily the churn side.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is always a function of each other. That's kind of how you need to think about it. So when you're going for the full sale, let's just call it that, that means that you have to assess what is the full value of the problem inside of that company that you're selling to. How does your company address that problem? How many different stakeholders inside that company are being affected by that problem? And then you will basically run through a sales process where you will start out by getting the primary champion involved. You will get the main decision maker involved. You will then start to potentially do multi-threading to basically get alternative stakeholders in the business who might have an adjacent problem that the platform can also solve. But what you're inherently doing there is that you're fully addressing the problem. You are having to draft in a lot of different stakeholders. You're having to get every one of them to agree. So those things will affect your sales cycle. They will affect your ACVs being higher, because now you're addressing a lot more pains that accumulated can warrant a higher ACV contract for the solution that you're solving. And then your conversion will typically not be as high, because you have to please a lot more people, and it has to be functional for all the different use cases that you have. And then once you land them, that is great, because now you have a high ACV, but you will typically also have low churn. And the reason for that is because now you're organizationally wide set up. There's no one person who can say, I don't like it anymore, I'm going to churn. So this is where you have the benefit of having low churn typically. You will have higher ACVs, but you will naturally have a handicap when it comes to upselling. So that's sort of where you will typically end up in the 100 to 105, and that's fantastic. It really works well, and this is why they have low churn and they appreciate that. That's also a really valuable part of the business. And typically, what this strategy is good for is if you have a product that requires maybe a lot of technical setup, so it takes some time to implement the product itself. It might even need to be onboarded properly through education and explaining how it works, and running workshops with different teams to kind of get them on board. That's where you want to have that high upfront investment to also warrant that you can go through the implementation, and that's where you want to basically capture the whole problem and basically address that and price it out and sell it. And then obviously if you have a different thing, which is that you have a la carte model, for example, this is where you have, we have split our products into different modules. We have given different user rights. So now we can basically have a lot of different add-ons or different portions of the product that can be added on or sold later on.
Yeah.
And what you can then, in that case, you can basically sell the core use case to the first buyer. You don't need to, sell to everyone at the same time. So what you're inherently doing there is that you are selling for a lower ACV. You will have a quicker sales process. You might have higher churn because you're not institutionally sort of installed in the business. But now you can actually start to address post-sales, how are you going to expand the account? And this is where you can get to, much higher NRR of, 120 or 130 potentially, because you've broken down your product in a way where it is upsellable. You will have quicker sales processes, but you will also leave money on the table. So the ACVs will naturally be, lower because you're not addressing the full business problem that the business might have. So that's where, that can still be applied to businesses that have some kind of a technical setup and need the onboarding. And, that's basically where we see the companies who are, performing above the average. What they are doing is that they're typically sort of very strategically setting up their sales strategy.
Yeah.
And their pricing and packaging to facilitate that. They might even have that they allow their AEs to participate in getting bonuses based on an upsell, because they don't want to incentivize the AEs to extract the full value in the initial sale. They would rather get the dollars in quick on a lower ACV, and then having a land and expand sort of mentality about it, and having then the product basically being built in the way and priced out in a way where that can be facilitated, right?
I think HubSpot is kind of also an example of a la carte, right? So they have a marketing hub, a sales hub, and a service hub. So it's three pretty big departments inside a SaaS company they can address. And I think what's pretty interesting is you can now have a separate sales-led motion to your outbound, which is dealing with existing customers who are already paying.
Yeah. No, and exactly. I mean, this is sort of what we see now, and obviously, product-led growth is a well-known concept and has been for a few years. Everyone thinks this is the new way that every business will sell their product. I don't necessarily believe in that, because I think that, that motion is really geared towards companies who have a extremely low setup, and where you basically can get, utility out of the product from day zero. So you swipe the credit card for $99 or whatever it might be. You add team members, and they can start using it immediately. And this is, for example, Slack is a great example of that.
Yeah.
And then what those companies have really achieved to do is to then create a frictionless way to upsell. And that really is, that's how they can get to 160, 70, 80% NRR, is because they have that based on usage or based on adding new users. There's no need to negotiate a new contract, which is typically what you would have in an a la carte model. You would actually have to sell those different components into different departments or regions. But with that, you can basically say, just add another user. We will then invoice you for that, and you have a true up and a true down as the company expands and contracts on the usage. And obviously, this is what everyone would like to have, because it sounds, easy sale upfront. But at the same time, it creates different problems. For example, for the CFO, it creates the problem that, I don't know what I'm going to be paying for software 6 months from now or 12 months from now. So they will obviously be a little bit hesitant to kind of jump on board with that. And but generally, they also like it because it's not buying shelfware. They know that they'll be paying based on usage. So there's a fair, equilibrium in terms of value being delivered and what he's paying for. So, he or she is paying for. But at the end of the day, this is sort of connected to the PLG motion, and where we're seeing the NRR hacking, where we're seeing the snowflakes of the world achieving, 170, 80, I don't know what it is today, but it's been crazy in terms of what it is. And this is where companies have very, very strategically actually engineered their sales process and what they're selling in the first go
Yeah.
to a proposition where that is not necessarily a value driver.
Yeah.
So you're basically selling, hey, here is an instance.
Yeah.
And that instance cost you, $100 or
Yeah.
$500. But actually the utility comes from when I connect data sources to it or I add 100 users, this platform is just not usable until you do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the initial land, which can then be set for $99 or 500 or whatever that number is really not the initial land number because you're not actually delivering on the utility of the product.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then when they do start to connect data sources and data starts flowing in and it's very clear what it will cost to actually, get that on board, that additional $2,000 or $3,000 can be called upsell.
Yeah.
And you could argue that is NRR hacking because now you've positionally sort of sold something that in itself might not have like an awesome utility, but because you can now call that the land price, everything that follows becomes an upsell.
Yeah.
And you could argue that they should actually be selling, if they just sold, the utility with the initial setup, they would probably end up with the same amount, but now they're basically bucketing revenue in two different sort of buckets, new base being the super low one. And the utility or the usage is basically now all upsell. And this is where you can end up with very dreamy looking numbers, right?
Yeah, probably when you look at the tables of the financials and the revenue streams, it's like you say, the expansion MR is gonna be wildly higher than the new biz MR.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so funny. So both you and I have procured Looker in the past.
Yeah.
Time to value is something like 6 months if you're really good.
Yeah.
I would say
Probably 12.
they're probably 12. But then if you can get something out of 6 months, then you're done truly well. So that's a long wait. They sell, at least that's the way I recall it. And I'm not the data guy, but almost full platform upfront and then fixed ACV pretty much, and you can do multi-year whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought Snowflake was doing the same model. That would make sense to me. They're kind of in the same space. Again, this is a marketing person trying to talk about BI here, right?
Yeah.
And then you were like, well, no, you go in and swipe your credit card and it's $100.
Yeah.
And then once you connect your data, it jumps to like 2K.
Yeah. No, and it's, I think ultimately, even though it is a repositioning of a number, and this is where the NRR maybe is ballooned a little bit, and some of that, this is what we call the NRR hacking, because it is engineering a number to a certain degree, right? But I do think that what the usage-based models do actually, where they actually do supersede what we have traditionally looked at. So if you take, Salesforce, for example, the way that they sell is that they want the full upfront commitment for the year for the total amount of users that you will possibly end up using for that year. So you're buying users that you won't have on the platform. You haven't hired them yet, right? And there you're asking a lot of an organization to assess the full utility of the platform, the full utility of the platform for anyone you will add in the future, and you want to price it to the maximum, and you want to lock in it for as long as you can, and you want to have upfront payments, right?
Yeah.
And that is obviously very hard to do because you're assessing even how many salespeople we have. Obviously, this is all very difficult. And with the other model, even though it is somewhat of a hack, you still are then subjected to what is the utility of it? How much will we need? And you will only pay when you need it. And that is a really extremely, fair value prop. And this is why it's almost easier to get the commitment of, $100 or $200 because the product has to be built in a way where it's built so well that people will use it and they will want to use it more. And you're relying on the product selling itself.
Yeah.
That is ultimately what it is. And then, and this goes back into sort of what is it that companies should be doing to optimize NRR? And there's many answers to that question. But at the end of the day, you cannot achieve those NRR numbers unless you have a product that's built for purpose for being self-used and self-upsold. You need to create contracts that have stipulations that if they add an extra user, they'll be charged differently. You have to create comp plans for sales that if they sell a customer, that they might benefit from, the upsell that occurs in the near future. You will have to price and package your product so that it can be sold in that increment and in that way. And as they expand on the utility, you can upsell them on that. And this is all very complicated, and then you will need to structure your go-to-market engine to facilitate that. So I think often people want to go to an NRR number and they say, well, how do we do it? And the complicated answer is that you have 5 levers or 4 levers that you can pull, but rarely can you pull the NRR up in the short term because all of them are long-term strategic initiatives that you will need to build into your business. The 2 ones which you can influence in the short term, which are upsells and churn. Churn is a super tanker.
Yeah.
It moves really slowly because the people who are leaving you today and tomorrow, they decided to leave you 6 months ago. So in the short run, you can't really influence churn all that much. And I have tried. Like,
you've tried calling them.
No, I mean, I created churn analytics engines. And I mean, I don't even know how many CSM I applied on each case. And you just realize that it's not an effort. Those companies that didn't get utility from your product for the last 6 months, they have already decided that they're leaving.
Yeah.
So changing that number is extremely hard, and it's ultimately a product that needs to be functional and deliver on the value that you've sold. And upselling, if you've sold the full value organizationally wide, that's not something you can lift up.
No.
Even though you apply now SDR team to call up existing customers, you apply 3 account managers in each account. That's not going to sell more product.
No.
If you're addressing their full pain with your solution, then that's what it is.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm saying that companies that have been built up with NRR in mind, they are the ones achieving those numbers because they have actually fully constructed their business around it, all the way from how they built the tech that they're selling to how they market and sell it, through how they incentivize the organization, and ultimately they have basically built a whole organization around it.
Yeah.
And if you want to change your NRR to those levels, then you need to build out those functions. You need to build out those capabilities internally, and that's not something that can happen overnight.
So I hope the listener is not going to go like, oh, I was really hoping I could just tomorrow go and then bump up the NRR. But, shifting a go-to-market motion when you already have, let's just say, 10 million ARR, that's going to be pretty difficult to do if you want to shift it into this gear.
Yeah. Now, I think if there was a quick hack out of all the things you can do, I would simply, try to look at the new business acquisition ACV and say, is it really necessary to extract that value, or are there smaller pains that we can segment out and sell for a smaller group?
Yeah.
Consciously taking a lower ACV and having a shorter sales cycle, and then building up the ability to upsell the value later on.
Yeah.
Basically now, it might take you longer to get a revenue dollar in, honestly. So you will optimize for a metric, but your upfront payment and when you will get those dollars will also be delayed into the future. So that is where you could do it, but that's where you would go in and change incentive models for sales. You would potentially have, different product tiers or different user rights that you could kind of segment out. But in the short term, that is really how you do it. You need to then not fully solve the total company-wide pain in the initial sales, and then extract from that, And this is the typical land and expand mindset that you want to have. But that is the only real short-term lever that you can sort of control.
But I think it's just super important to address, right? And I think in past episodes, Tony and I have talked about, hey, if you want to build out a new motion, be prepared to spend 12 months on it, because it takes time, and it's going to be the same with, if you want to start impacting NR. Yeah. But I just find it so fascinating. Like we were talking before we started recording, Tony and I talked about Monday.com. So project management tool, they do a few other things as well. I think CRM, and they have a lot.
They do a lot
going.
of stuff.
They do a lot of stuff, right? And he was talking about, well, why is an account executive like hand holding me through the process of buying a tool that's gonna cost us $100 a month?
Yeah,
and
it's because you're going to be paying $1,000 for it in 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the power of it, and I think this is where long term you can consider, hey, is this a future path of growth for us, and what shift do we as a business need to make? And then realizing it's not going to be a Q1 project, because just when you said sales incentives, that's a whole massive task on its own. Just all the one-on-ones you're going to have.
No, but at the end of the day, it's about creating a completely frictionless way to sell a new product.
Yeah.
And when you have SDRs, account executives who need to run a 60-day sales process, showing the demo, calling it, that's friction.
Yeah.
All of that is friction. With that friction comes a higher ACV, and that's fantastic. but you are creating friction. So creating a completely frictionless way to buy the product, and then subsequently a completely frictionless way to upsell the product, those are the NRR first companies that we're seeing today being built. And ultimately, I think it's fantastic. And I would love to build Growblock to be the same way because, and we have started doing some of that. We were showing the product on the website. We want to cut down the account executive sales process as much as we can. Because at the end of the day, people just want to get their hands on the product to see if it works for them and then make a decision of how much they want to use it and hence how much they're going to pay for it.
I can't tell you how many times I've just been like, I just want to see the things.
Yeah.
I don't want to get a call and be screened. I just want to see it
Who
so I
wants
can
to do
understand.
another discovery call?
Yeah. But I hope this was super interesting.
Yeah.
At least I found it pretty fascinating to just start breaking down that NRR hyper growth engine they have going on. Super important again to point out this is not something you do in a quarter or even probably a year. It's going to take a bit of time.
Yeah.
But if you can nail it, then you can grow pretty darn fast.
Yeah. If you build your company to do it, then it can be done.
Lots of work ahead of us, I guess.
For sure.
But thanks so much for being the substitute.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe we'll have you on for another episode again next week. Who knows? We'll see. I need to review, I guess, this episode and decide whether I even want. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Thanks so much, Olafur.
Thank you, Mikkel.
Take care. Bye.